Morning sunlight filtered through the glass walls of Voss Tower, slicing across polished marble floors and silent corridors that smelled faintly of cedar polish and cold steel. At 47 stories above the city, Dominic Voss stood before his panoramic window, watching the traffic crawl below like veins of light through a sleeping body. Everything about him, his tailored charcoal suit, the stillness of his shoulders, the watch set 3 minutes fast, spoke of a man who did not tolerate imperfection. Behind him, faint movement disturbed the order. A soft rustle of fabric, a footstep too close. He turned sharply. There she was, Amina Njoroge, the new maid, standing near his leather sofa, dustcloth in hand. She had paused mid-wipe, eyes fixed on the city view as though it whispered something to her. The early light touched her dark skin with bronze warmth, and for a fleeting instant, she looked entirely out of place, too vivid, too alive in this museum of power and restraint. Dominic's jaw hardened. "Did I say you could sit?" Her eyes widened. She hadn't sat, but his tone carried the memory of her first week, when he'd walked in to find her perched carefully at the edge of the sofa, his sofa tying her shoe. The reprimand had been merciless. "No, sir," she said quietly, her accent lilting, each syllable precise but colored by something melodic that irritated him because it refused to be flattened into obedience. "Then don't hover," he snapped. "You're here to clean, not to admire the view." "Yes, Mr. Voss." She lowered her gaze and resumed her work, moving with controlled grace, like someone trained to erase her own presence. He watched her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned away, annoyed at himself for noticing the steadiness of her hands, the quiet dignity that seemed immune to humiliation. The rest of the day unfolded with mechanical precision: meetings, signatures, forecasts. Numbers behaved, people did not. His assistant, Thomas Reed, followed him through the maze of offices, murmuring updates. "Sir, the art shipment from the estate is arriving this afternoon." Dominic's brows lifted. "Which estate?" "Your late father's. The manor restoration is complete. The curator said the pieces are being moved for cataloging." Dominic gave a non-committal nod. The old mansion was a ghost he avoided: Eleanor Voss's art collections, the smell of linseed oil, the endless gallery walls. His father had locked the place after her death 20 years ago. He didn't like remembering that house. By dusk, the city burned gold. Dominic returned to his penthouse, exhaustion wrapped in silence. The household staff melted away like shadows when he entered, except Amina, who was polishing silver near the dining table. He noticed something odd. The framed photograph on the hallway console, his mother, smiling at a gallery opening, had been slightly repositioned, barely an inch off, but enough for him to notice. He frowned. "You moved this." Amina looked up, startled. "I wiped the frame, sir." "It must have shifted." He studied her expression, calm, respectful, unreadable, yet something in her eyes flickered, almost wistful, when she looked at the photo. "Did you know her?" he asked suddenly. Her hands stilled. "No, Mr. Voss. Only what I've heard." He nodded slowly, unconvinced, and walked away. Later that night, Dominic couldn't sleep. The city lights pulsed through the glass like distant heartbeat monitors. He poured a drink, scrolled through stock reports, and tried to ignore the echo of Amina's voice, soft, careful, carrying secrets between its vowels. He went downstairs to his private study, intending to check on the delivered artwork. Several crates leaned against the wall, marked Voss Estate, fragile. He sliced open the first, old oil smell. Canvas, dust. The second crate revealed portraits, his mother's hand evident in the brushstrokes. She had loved painting faces, mostly those of the servants, gardeners, drivers, ordinary people, made immortal on canvas. He lifted a smaller portrait. A young woman stared back, bare shoulders, luminous eyes, painted with reverence. The style was unmistakably Eleanor's, but the signature in the corner had faded. Something about the face tugged at him, the shape of the jawline, the proud tilt of the head. He carried the painting to the light. His hand trembled. The resemblance was impossible. It looked like Amina. Not just a likeness, an echo, the same eyes, same quiet defiance, painted at least 20 years ago. Dominic's pulse quickened. He checked the back of the frame there, faint pencil writing, A. N. 2005. He set the portrait down, his mind racing. Was it coincidence, or was this woman in his house now this maid connected somehow to his mother's secret life? He heard a faint creak from the hallway. Footsteps retreating. He moved quickly, opened the door. The corridor was empty, but a shadow slipped down the servants' staircase. Dominic followed silently until he reached the lower level. Amina was there, standing before a storage room door. She held something in an envelope, and was about to place it inside a drawer marked Private, D. Voss Archives. He froze, unseen, watching her. Amina looked around once, then whispered something he couldn't catch. Her hand trembled slightly as she slid the envelope into the drawer. Dominic took a half step forward, the floorboard creaking under his shoe. Amina spun, startled, eyes wide. For a moment, they stared at each other, her face caught in the dim yellow light, half guilt, half fear. She began. But he raised a hand. Go to your quarters, he said quietly. Now. She hesitated, then obeyed, disappearing into the shadows. Dominic stood there long after she left, staring at the drawer. His chest tightened not with anger, but with the kind of curiosity that feels like danger disguised as fascination. He opened the drawer. Inside was the envelope. Plain, sealed. No address, no name. Only a faint scent of something old oil paint, and the ghost of perfume he hadn't smelled since his mother's last day. He hesitated, then slid the envelope back. For some reason he didn't understand, he wasn't ready to open it yet. But as he turned off the light and closed the drawer, he saw something that made him stop cold. A reflection in the glass of the storage cabinet, the portrait of Amina, now leaning against the wall, and behind it his mother's signature clearly visible beneath fresh varnish. Eleanor Voss had painted her 20 years ago. And somehow, the woman from that painting was standing in his house tonight. Dominic witnesses something he wasn't meant to see, a portrait that shouldn't exist, bearing the face of the woman he just humiliated. The next morning, the world pretended to be ordinary. Sunlight spilled into the penthouse kitchen, reflecting off chrome appliances and sterile order. Dominic sat at the counter with a mug of black coffee, scrolling through overnight market summaries. But his attention kept drifting to the painting locked in his study, to the sealed envelope he hadn't dared open. He hated not knowing. Ignorance, to him, was weakness. The smell of lavender oil broke his thoughts. Amina entered quietly, wearing her crisp uniform, her hair neatly wrapped. She moved like someone who had learned invisibility as survival. "Good morning, Mr. Voss," she said softly, eyes downcast. Dominic didn't reply at first. He watched her unload the silver tray, careful, methodical. Not a tremor in her hand. If she was hiding guilt, she hid it well. Finally, he said, "Where did you work before this?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "In London, sir, and before that, Nairobi. Domestic service mostly." His gaze sharpened. "For whom?" A pause. "The Van Houtens," she said. "And before them, an art patron." That word art hit like static in his chest. He leaned forward slightly. "Name?" She hesitated. "It was long ago, sir. She's passed now." He didn't move, didn't breathe. "What was her name, Amina?" "Eleanor Voss." The words were quiet, respectful, and detonated the morning silence like a controlled explosion. She met his gaze at last, steady, unflinching. There was no apology in her eyes, only something deeper. Recognition. Dominic felt his throat tighten. "You worked for my mother." "Yes," she said, "for a short time. Before she died." He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, the calm grace, the practiced silence, the eyes that carried years of patience. His mother had painted her not as a servant but as a muse. "Why?" He set down his coffee, forcing his voice to stay even. "You never mentioned that, when you were hired." "It wasn't asked," she said, "and I thought it might not matter." "It matters." She bowed her head. "I see that now." That day, Dominic's schedule collapsed under distraction. The portrait haunted him. He summoned Thomas Reed. "Get me everything from the estate archives," Dominic ordered. "My mother's journals, her art records, correspondence. All of it." Thomas frowned. Is something wrong, sir? Dominic hesitated. Just bring them. Thomas nodded and left, though curiosity lingered in his glance. Evening fell like slow ink. The penthouse dimmed except for the flicker of a single lamp. Dominic had been staring at the portrait for hours. The brushwork around the woman's eyes soft, deliberate, almost reverent made his chest ache in a way he didn't understand. He replayed fragments of childhood, his mother's laughter echoing through marble halls, the smell of turpentine, her saying, "Every face I paint tells the truth I couldn't say aloud." And now this truth looked back at him through Amina's features. When Amina came to collect linens that night, she found him standing near the portrait. "Close the door," he said quietly. She obeyed. "Tell me everything." Her voice trembled slightly when she began. "Your mother was kind. She saw me sketching once, on scrap paper. I was just a housemaid then. She said I had an artist's hand. She let me help in her studio sometimes, clean brushes, mix oils." "Did she paint you?" A small, pained smile, she insisted, said my face reminded her of something she'd lost long ago. Dominic's heartbeat thudded. Something she lost? She never told me what, only that she painted me when she was ill. She said the portrait was for her son. He stared at her. "For me?" Amina nodded slowly. "She said you'd understand it someday." The room felt colder suddenly. The hum of the city below faded until all he could hear was his own breath. His mother had left him this, but why hide it for 2 decades? Thomas arrived the next morning with a box from the estate. Inside were journals, sketchbooks, and a sealed envelope marked in his mother's handwriting, "For D.V., when ready." His hands shook as he opened it. Inside, a short note and a photograph. "Dominic, if you ever find the girl with the fire in her eyes, be kind to her, the world won't be. She is a part of us, though not in the way you think. Mother." He flipped the photo over an old picture of Eleanor standing beside a young Kenyan woman with striking eyes. The resemblance to Amina was undeniable. But the photo was dated 2005, the same year his mother died. Something didn't fit. Amina looked the same age now as she did in that picture 20 years ago. Dominic frowned, studying the back again. The timestamp from the old camera read the 14th of August 2005. He looked up. His mother had died in June of that year. Which meant the photograph shouldn't exist. He went straight to Amina, found her folding sheets in the guest quarters. "You said she painted you when she was ill," he said. "When exactly?" She hesitated. "That summer, she was already weak, but she wouldn't stop working. She was dead by that summer." Amina froze. "What?" "She died in June. This photo is dated August." For the first time, her composure cracked, her eyes filled with confusion and something like fear. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I was there, she was alive." Dominic studied her face. "Do you have any proof? Any letters, anything from her?" She shook her head slowly. "No, only memories." He wanted to accuse her of lying, of manipulation, but something about her trembling voice stopped him. "You're telling me my mother was alive after her death certificate was signed?" "I don't know what to tell you," she said, tears welling. "But I remember her. I remember the way she said your name, Dominic. She spoke of you as if you were—" She stopped herself. "As if I were what?" he pressed. Amina swallowed. "As if you were her second chance." The air between them turned electric, grief, disbelief, and something unspoken threading through it all. That night, Dominic sat in the dark, staring again at the photo. Behind the 2 women stood a wall of paintings, none of which he recognized. One detail snagged his attention, a brass plaque on the wall behind them that read Voss Hall, Private Collection Room 3. Room 3 had been sealed after his mother's death. He remembered because he tried to go in as a teenager, and his father had locked it, saying, "Some doors aren't meant to be opened." If that room appeared in a photo taken after her death, then maybe she'd never left it at all. He stood, heart pounding. He needed to see that room. The next day, he drove to the countryside estate, a sprawling manor crouched beneath skeletal oaks. The caretaker, Mr. Grayson, met him at the gates, startled by the unannounced visit. "I need the keys to room 3, Dominic said. Grayson's eyes flicked, uneasy. That room was sealed by your father's order, sir. No one's entered in 20 years. Then it's time someone did. Grayson hesitated, then retrieved a small brass key. His hand shook as he handed it over. Dominic took it, his pulse thrumming. He walked the long corridor alone until he reached the heavy wooden door. The brass number 3 gleamed faintly under dust. He turned the key, the lock protesting with a groan. Inside, the room smelled of turpentine and faint decay. Canvases lined the walls, draped in cloth, and there against the far wall hung another portrait. He lifted the cloth. It was his mother, holding a baby in her arms. But the baby's skin was dark. Dominic finds something deeply personal, a hidden painting of his mother with a child who cannot possibly be him, hanging in the wrong place, in a sealed room that shouldn't exist. Dust hung in the air like memory, thick and bitter. Dominic stood frozen before the portrait, his mother, serene and radiant, cradling a child whose skin tone mirrored Amina's, not his. The brushwork was intimate, each line of affection painted by a woman who knew the truth she couldn't speak aloud. He stepped closer. In the lower right corner, beneath the varnish, a signature shimmered faintly. Eleanor Voss, 2005. Again that impossible year. His phone vibrated in his pocket, breaking the trance. Thomas Reed. Sir, the London board is expecting you in 2 hours. Your flight? Cancel it, Dominic said flatly. Sir. Cancel everything. Indefinitely. He ended the call and stared at the baby in the portrait, its eyes impossibly alive. A strange instinct stirred, one he hadn't felt since childhood. Protectiveness, confusion, maybe fear. The caretaker, Mr. Grayson, hovered in the doorway, hat clutched tight. Forgive me, sir. That room's best left closed. Your father ordered it sealed for a reason. Dominic turned slowly. And what reason was that? Grayson's jaw worked. Like a man choosing words that wouldn't cost him his job. Said some things shouldn't be dug up. Said grief can rot if it's fed. Dominic studied the older man's face. You knew this painting was here. Grayson didn't answer directly. Your mother was fond of the girl she painted, spent long hours with her, drove the master half mad. The girl, Dominic repeated. Was her name Amina? Grayson's eyes flickered. She used another name then. I can't recall it proper, but she looked just the same. Dominic stepped closer, voice dropping. You expect me to believe a woman hasn't aged in 20 years? Grayson looked away. I don't expect you to believe anything, sir. Only that some things don't like being remembered. The words sent a chill through the air. Dominic covered the portrait again, locked the door behind him, and left the manor without another word. Back in the city, the world no longer obeyed him. Meetings passed like static, numbers blurred. His empire, usually so precise, felt fragile, unreal. Every reflection of Amina's face now carried an echo of that child's portrait. That evening, he returned home early. The penthouse was silent except for faint music, Amina humming softly as she polished the banister. The tune froze him. It was the same lullaby his mother used to hum when he couldn't sleep. He stepped into view. Where did you learn that song? Amina startled, nearly dropping her cloth. What song, sir? The one you were humming. Her brow furrowed. I don't remember. It's something from when I was young. You're certain? Yes, sir. He said nothing, just watched her. And she, perhaps without meaning to, lifted her gaze to his, a question trembling between them that neither could ask. What if we share more than we know? Later that night, as rain drummed the windows, Dominic opened his laptop and began digging. Estate records, birth registries, immigration logs from 2004-2006. One name kept recurring, Amina Njiroge, listed as an assistant under Eleanor Voss's Art Foundation, then abruptly deleted from the official employee list 6 months before Eleanor's death. Deleted but not erased. He found an archived financial transfer, £50,000 wired to a Kenyan account under the name A.N. Trust. The sender Eleanor Voss. He stared at the screen. His mother had paid Amina or someone with her name a small fortune 2 weeks before her death. Why? A private message pinged at the corner of his inbox. From, unknown. Subject, stop digging. He clicked it open. A single line glowed against the dark. Some portraits were meant to stay buried. You'll regret unearthing hers. He felt the blood drain from his face. He glanced toward the hallway, half expecting to see someone watching. The apartment lights flickered once, then steadied. The next morning, Thomas stormed into the office. Dominic, the auditors are asking questions. Someone's been accessing restricted archives from the Voss estate servers, and it's not you. Dominic frowned. Then who? Don't know. But whoever it is, they're covering their tracks. Files vanish minutes after we open them. A creeping unease spread through Dominic's spine. He'd built companies on secrets and silence, but this felt personal. Lock everything down, he ordered. Every file tied to my mother, the foundation, or Amina. Thomas hesitated. Dominic, is she involved in this? He didn't answer. He couldn't. That evening, Amina came to his study, carrying freshly laundered curtains. Her portrait had been hidden again behind the couch. But she saw it instantly. Her gaze flicked toward the covered canvas, a tremor of recognition in her breath. You moved it, she said quietly. I moved it where it belongs, he replied. Does it? Her tone was calm, but the question landed like a blade. He turned on her sharply. Tell me the truth. Who are you? I told you. Not enough. She met his eyes, steady now. I am what your mother saw in me, what you refused to see. Which is? A reflection. Her words unnerved him. He reached for the portrait cloth and pulled it away. Explain this. Why would she paint you holding? He stopped. The canvas looked different. The baby in the painting gone. The arms in Eleanor's lap were empty. Dominic stepped back, cold spreading through his body. This isn't possible, he whispered. Amina's face drained of color. What did you say? There was a child here. He pointed at the blank space. She shook her head slowly, trembling. No, sir. There was never a child. He grabbed his phone, scrolling to the photo he'd taken at the estate. The baby was their incontrovertible proof. He showed it to her. Her eyes widened. That's not what I saw when you uncovered it. The silence between them pulsed. Then she whispered, whatever this is, Mr. Voss, it's not finished with us. For 2 nights, Dominic barely slept. Dreams came vivid and heavy, his mother painting in candlelight, whispering to someone unseen, a cradle rocking in the corner. A child's laughter echoing through marble halls. On the 3rd night, he drove again to the countryside manor, desperate for answers. But when he arrived, the gates were open, and the caretaker was gone. The main door hung ajar. Inside, the sealed room 3 stood wide open, its contents ransacked, paintings slashed, frames broken. Only one thing remained untouched, the small brass cradle in the corner, hidden behind a sheet. He approached, heart thudding, and pulled the cloth away. Inside lay a yellowed envelope. He opened it with shaking hands. A birth certificate. Name, Elena Amina Voss. Date, the 14th of June 2005. Mother, Eleanor Voss. Father, blank. Dominic's throat closed. Amina wasn't just a servant. She was his mother's daughter. His hand trembled, the certificate fluttering like a wound in the air. Behind him, a voice spoke from the doorway, low, unfamiliar, calm. I warned you not to look, Mr. Voss. He turned sharply. A man in a dark coat stood there, face half hidden, rain dripping from his hair. Who are you? Dominic demanded. The stranger stepped closer, eyes cold as stone. Someone who cleans up your family's mistakes. Dominic's hand tightened around the paper. What mistakes? The man smiled thinly. Starting with the one standing in your house. What do you mean? The stranger's smile vanished. Walk away from her, Dominic. Stop asking questions, or people get hurt. Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. Dominic stood frozen in the ruined gallery, thunder rolling outside, the birth certificate clutched in his fist. A mysterious stranger warns Dominic, stop looking or people get hurt, moments after he discovers evidence that Amina might be his half-sister. The rain chased Dominic all the way back to the city, hammering the windshield like an accusation. He drove without thought, headlights tunneling through blackness. Every word from that stranger replayed in his head like static. Stop looking or people get hurt. He wanted to believe it was an empty threat some lunatic sent by a rival, but the cold precision of the voice said otherwise. And then there was the paper on the passenger seat, the birth certificate. He couldn't unsee the name, Elena Amina Voss. His mother's handwriting on the notes in the margin. The faint, worn crease at the bottom where someone had folded it, perhaps Amina herself. The city swallowed him again, neon flicker and exhaust curling around the car. He parked beneath the tower and sat there, engine idling, until the building's automatic lights blinked on. His reflection in the glass was a stranger's, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, every trace of control frayed. He carried the envelope up to his private suite. The penthouse felt wrong tonight, too quiet, too still. Somewhere behind the walls, air vents whispered like breath. Amina was nowhere to be seen. Her quarters were dark, bed neatly made, a small charcoal sketch rested on the desk, his mother's hands, drawn from memory. It was delicate, reverent. He pocketed it without knowing why. Then he locked himself in the study, opened a bottle of whiskey, and stared at the certificate under lamplight. If Amina was his mother's daughter, then she was his sister. Half-sister. Illegitimate, hidden, raised in silence. But if that were true, why send her here? Why let her work as a maid in his home? Unless, she didn't know either. At 3 a.m., he called Thomas. Trace the birth record, Dominic said. His voice was low, controlled, but Thomas could hear the strain. Sir, it's the middle of the night. I don't care. Kenya, 2005. Name, Elena Amina Voss. Find who registered it. A pause. Is this about the Foundation inquiry? It's about my mother. Thomas's tone shifted. Understood, sir. Dominic ended the call and leaned back. For a long time, he just listened to the soft hiss of air conditioning, the hum of distant traffic. Then, a faint click broke through the quiet. He froze. It came again. A soft metallic tick, from the corner vent. He moved slowly toward it, lifted the grate with a screwdriver, and found a small black object wired to the frame. A camera. His pulse spiked. He checked the bookshelf. The smoke detector, the recessed light above the desk. Another lens glinted faintly. Someone was watching him. He called security, barked orders. The building's head of surveillance swore the system was clean, no unknown logins, no third-party access. But when they traced the tiny camera's make, it wasn't from their inventory, it was military-grade, untraceable. The kind used for internal espionage, not burglary. Dominic dismissed the guards. He needed to think. Who had access to his study? Only two people, himself and Amina. He didn't want to believe it, but the pattern kept tightening. She'd been at his mother's side. She knew her secrets. She moved through this house like she already belonged here. And now strangers were warning him to stay away from her. He pulled open the desk drawer, the one where he'd left the envelope she'd hidden earlier in the week. It was gone. He swore under his breath, shoved the drawer shut hard enough to rattle the frame. Morning crept gray over the skyline. Amina appeared in the kitchen as if nothing had happened, pouring tea, quiet as dawn. Dominic stood across from her, watching every motion. Where were you last night? He asked. She blinked. Here, sir. I finished cleaning and went to bed. He set the small black camera on the counter between them. Then explained this. Her eyes widened. What is it? You tell me. It was hidden in my study. I've never seen that before. You've never seen it, he repeated slowly. And yet you have keys to every room. Her composure wavered. Are you accusing me of spying on you, Mr. Voss? I'm asking how it got there. I don't know, she said, voice trembling now. But maybe you should ask who gave me this job. That stopped him cold. He frowned. What does that mean? She met his gaze, fierce now. I didn't apply here. Your head of staff found me, said my name was recommended by your family foundation. Dominic turned sharply toward the door. Thomas. When Thomas arrived, the air between them was already electric. You hired her? Dominic demanded. Yes, Thomas said carefully. Her references were spotless. The foundation database listed her under legacy staff of Eleanor Voss. I assumed you approved it. I didn't. Thomas's face tightened. Then someone forged your authorization. But who would? They both stopped. The same name echoed between them, the Foundation. That was where the payments had originated. The same organization that had quietly funneled money to Kenya. Dominic turned to Amina. You said you worked for an art patron before my mother died. Did she ever mention anyone from the Foundation? She nodded slowly. One man, he used to visit the studio, handle documents. Said he was from the Voss Trust. What was his name? She closed her eyes, remembering, Reed. Thomas stared. That's impossible. There's no other Reed in the family records. Dominic's jaw clenched. You're sure? I remember the accent. English, cold. He wore gloves even in summer. Thomas swallowed. That's not me. Amina looked at him for a long time, then back at Dominic. No. But maybe someone wanted me here for a reason. That evening, Dominic went back to the Foundation headquarters himself. The night staff didn't question him, no one ever did. He had clearance for everything. He moved through dark corridors until he reached the archive room. Inside, rows of server racks humming softly, blue light casting shadows. He logged in under his master credentials. A folder blinked in the archive directory, EV Legacy, protected. He entered. Inside were encrypted documents, hundreds, but one stood out, labeled Inheritance Protocol, Subject A, N. He opened it. Lines of data filled the screen: DNA records, financial transfers, sealed guardianship contracts. Then a scanned memo, dated 2 months before Eleanor's death. Subject A, N, to be placed under direct observation once relocated, emotional conditioning preferred, do not disclose lineage to heir until behavioral assessment complete. Dominic felt his stomach twist. Observation. Conditioning. His mother's Foundation had been watching Amina her entire life. And maybe watching him, too. He returned home near dawn. The penthouse lights were off. He moved quietly through the hall, heart pounding. From his study, faint static hummed, the computer monitor flickering on by itself. A single open window glowed white. He stepped closer. A live video feed. The camera angle, his own bedroom. He saw himself, asleep, from the night before. And in the frame's corner, Amina's silhouette, standing beside his bed, watching him. Dominic's breath caught. He turned around sharply. The study door was ajar. Footsteps in the corridor. He snatched the birth certificate from the desk and crossed to the wall switch, snapping the lights on. The corridor was empty. But when he looked back toward his study's window, he saw movement on the opposite building's rooftop, a figure in a dark coat, holding binoculars, motionless against the city lights. Watching him. Dominic discovers, he's under surveillance cameras in his own home, footage of himself sleeping, and someone watching from across the skyline. For 2 days, Dominic barely slept. The city continued its rotation meetings, investors, press statements, but he drifted through it like a ghost carrying secrets no one could imagine. The cameras were gone now, ripped from the vents, the walls, the ceilings, yet even in their absence, he felt the unseen gaze. Every reflection, every mirrored lobby made him pause. He had seen the footage with his own eyes, himself, sleeping, and Amina's shadow standing at his bedside. The rational part of his mind told him there had to be an explanation. The other part whispered something colder. She's part of it. She's always been part of it. That morning, Thomas called from the office. Sir, the press wants a comment about the Foundation audit. Someone leaked internal financial records. Handle it, Dominic said curtly. There's something else. A document surfaced about inheritance conditioning. The phrasing matches what you sent me from the archive. Dominic's grip on the phone tightened. Who saw it? Everyone, sir, it's trending. People think the Foundation ran psychological experiments on African children under your mother's name. Dominic's heart dropped. His mother's legacy destroyed in a single morning headline. Find the source, he ordered. I already did, Thomas said. It came from a private IP linked to your penthouse Wi-Fi. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Amina. He ended the call and stormed through the house. She was in the conservatory, trimming dead leaves from his mother's orchids, sunlight softening her face. Tell me why you did it, he said. She looked up, startled. Did what? Don't play innocent. The leak came from my network. You accessed the servers. You wanted the story out. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock. I haven't touched your system. I don't even know your passwords. You were in my study at night, he snapped. I saw the footage. Her brow furrowed. Footage? Don't lie. He slammed the birth certificate on the table between them. You've been manipulating me from the start. Pretending to be a victim, playing kind, all while stealing from me. She flinched as his words grew harsher. I don't understand what you think I've done. You're not even who you say you are you? Her lips parted, trembling. And who am I, then? Dominic thrust the document toward her. Elena Amina Voss. My mother's daughter, my sister, or maybe her invention. Whatever you are, you've been watching me since you arrived. The color drained from her face. She reached out, hands shaking. Where did you get that? He stepped back. So, it's true. Tears welled in her eyes. No, it's not what you think. Then tell me the truth. She hesitated for too long. And in that pause, Dominic made his choice. By noon, the press had his statement. He called a briefing at Voss Industries headquarters and attempt to control the narrative. He'd expose the truth himself, he thought. Tear away the manipulation. The conference hall was packed. Journalists, investors, foundation board members, cameras blinked in rows like watchful eyes. He took the stage, suit immaculate, voice steady. There have been allegations regarding the Voss Foundation's legacy projects, he began. Let me be clear, any wrongdoing was conducted without my knowledge. Recent evidence suggests infiltration within our organization, including surveillance planted in my private residence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He continued, an individual posing as household staff has been identified as the key link between the stolen documents and external actors attempting to defame my family's name. The audience stirred. Flashes from cameras streaked white across his vision. Her name is Amina Mwende, Dominic said, the words heavy. She entered my home under false pretenses, and I have reason to believe she is connected to the unauthorized leaks. Gasps. Reporters scribbled. Somewhere in the back, a voice rose. You mean your sister? The room froze. Dominic looked up sharply. A journalist from The Guardian stood, holding a tablet. On the screen, an image of the birth certificate, watermarked and already public. How do you respond to this? She asked. To reports that Amina Mwende is legally recognized as your mother's biological daughter? The air seemed to vanish from the room. Dominic's pulse roared in his ears. That document is falsified, he said, forcing calm. But then another reporter called out. We verified it with Nairobi's registry. It's authentic. Thomas, standing off stage, looked stricken. The crowd's energy shifted, no longer curious, but ravenous. Are you saying your mother's charity created her own child in secret? Someone yelled. Was this the experiment you tried to hide? Dominic's hands trembled. Cameras closed in, words piled over one another, questions turning into accusations. He caught a glimpse of Thomas mouthing something, but couldn't hear it. His throat was dry, his control disintegrating. I won't entertain conspiracy theories, he said hoarsely. This woman invaded my home. She. Then the big screen behind him flickered. A video began to play. Footage of his study, grainy, time-stamped. Dominic himself, tearing open walls, holding the black cameras, his voice cold, furious. You've been spying on me. Then another clip. Amina standing at the doorway, frightened, whispering, I haven't done anything, Mr. Voss, please. Cut to Dominic shouting, face twisted in rage. The feed froze on that frame. Every camera in the hall captured it. Silence filled the space. And then, like a spark, the murmurs returned sharper now, judgmental. Someone shouted, Is this how you treat your staff? Another, That woman worked for your mother for years. Dominic's composure shattered. You don't understand. But the crowd no longer cared. Thomas stepped forward, whispering urgently, We need to leave, now. Dominic's gaze darted across the sea of faces, hungry, gleeful, condemning. He felt stripped, exposed, humiliated. As he descended the stage, flashes followed him like gunfire. In the car, silence stretched heavy. Thomas finally spoke. "The footage came from your internal system, sir. Whoever planted those cameras had access to your cloud backups." "Then it wasn't her," Dominic muttered, realization sinking like a knife. "No," Thomas said quietly, "it wasn't." The truth hit him too late. He'd crucified her in front of the world. That evening, the penthouse was empty. Amina's quarters were cleared out, beds stripped, shelves bare. Only one thing remained on the nightstand: the charcoal sketch of his mother's hands. On the back, in small, careful handwriting, "I never wanted to hurt you, I only wanted you to see her as I did." He sank onto the bed, head in his hands. The city lights bled through the glass like wounded stars. Hours later, Thomas called again. "There's something else," he said. "Before she left, Amina visited your mother's old mansion." Dominic looked up, exhausted. "Why?" "She asked to see the portrait room. The curator said she just stood there for a long time. Then she asked one question: who painted the last one?" "The last one?" "The portrait of your mother holding a child, the one we all assumed was you." Dominic's breath caught. Thomas hesitated. "She touched the frame and said, 'This isn't him.' Then she walked out." Dominic closed his eyes, dread thickening in his chest. Because he suddenly remembered the faint difference in the brushstroke, the darker tone of the child's skin, the unfamiliar signature in the corner. It wasn't his mother's work. It was hers. Dominic believes he's exposed Amina as a fraud, only to be humiliated when the media reveals she's actually family, and that he's been manipulated into destroying his own reputation. The days that followed were a slow collapse. Voss Industries stock plummeted. Investors froze accounts. The foundation's board suspended him pending investigation. Reporters swarmed the tower lobby like carrion birds, shouting questions about his secret sister, his experiments, his temper. Every headline carried his name beside words like cruelty, exploitation, collapse. For a man who had built his empire on control, it was unbearable. He hid in the penthouse, curtains drawn, phone silenced. The once sterile rooms seemed alive now, every shadow a memory of what he'd done. He tried to justify it. "She lied. She deceived me. She stood over me as I slept." But those thoughts rang hollow now. Because when the video leaked, he had seen her eyes in the frozen frame, frightened, pleading, not deceitful. He destroyed her anyway. On the third night, he opened a bottle of whiskey and wandered into the portrait hall, the one his mother had built before her death. Oil canvases watched from the walls, donors, founders, his father, his mother. And there, at the far end, the painting that had haunted him since Thomas's call. Eleanor Voss with a child. He approached it slowly, the amber light glinting off the varnish. The child's features were soft, mixed, the skin darker than his, the eyes quiet, watchful, mirrored Amina's exactly. In the lower corner, beneath the date, a second name was signed beside his mother's, Elena Amina. He reached out, fingers brushing the frame. His throat closed. He remembered something small, buried. He was 10 years old, sitting in his mother's studio, watching her paint. There had been another child there that day, a girl his age, laughing quietly as his mother adjusted her posture. When he'd asked who she was, his mother had said, "Someone special, someone I want to keep safe." He hadn't thought about it in 25 years. The whiskey burned in his chest as he staggered back. He had shouted at Amina, humiliated her, accused her of betrayal when, in truth, she might have been the only innocent in the room. She hadn't leaked the documents. She hadn't spied on him. Someone else had planted those cameras, someone inside the foundation, manipulating them both. He'd been a pawn. At 2 a.m., he called Thomas. The man answered groggily, voice rough. "I need access to all Foundation security logs," Dominic said. "The week before the leak." "Sir, the board's locked you out." "I'm not asking for permission." Thomas hesitated, then sighed. "I can get them. But, are you sure this will help?" Dominic looked at the portrait again. "It's the only thing that will." The files arrived an hour later, encrypted, time-stamped logs from the internal servers. He spread them across his screens, tracing connections, failed logins, access attempts, One entry repeated same user ID, same time, admin Reed. He froze. Reed. The name Amina had mentioned the man with gloves, the one who claimed to represent the trust. But here was the twist. Reed wasn't a name at all. It was an internal code name. He dug deeper, cross-referenced metadata. The real identity surfaced behind the alias. Thomas Reedwell. His head of security, his most trusted ally. He called him immediately. Thomas, he said, voice low, steady. I'm looking at the access logs. Admin Reed. A long pause. Dominic. You were inside my network. You planted those cameras. I had to, Thomas said quietly. She was getting too close. She? You mean Amina? I mean Eleanor's secret, Thomas replied. You weren't supposed to find out. Neither of you were. It was your mother's wish. Dominic's hand tightened around the phone. What are you talking about? Your mother didn't just run a charity, Thomas said. She ran a contingency. In case the board turned on her, she created a successor, someone who couldn't be controlled. Amina was that successor. She's the one with legal claim to half the foundation. Dominic's breath hitched. You're lying. I wish I was. Eleanor asked me to watch her, to keep her safe from you. From me. Yes, she thought your ambition would destroy everything she built. She said power needed empathy to survive, and you'd lost that long ago. The line went dead. Dominic sat there, stunned. His mother's voice echoed in memory, soft, firm, always 2 steps ahead. He finally understood what Thomas meant by conditioning. The foundation hadn't experimented on Amina. They'd raised her to balance what Dominic had become. 2 halves of one legacy, logic and compassion. Control and conscience. Brother and sister. And the moment he discovered her, he'd done exactly what his mother feared, tried to destroy her. He spent the rest of the night searching. Her phone was disconnected, her email, gone. No trace of her in the city. Until he remembered the note Thomas mentioned, the old mansion. He drove through the night. By dawn, the Voss mansion stood before him again, silent, mist curling around its gates. The caretaker let him in wordlessly, as though expecting him. The hall smelled of dust and oil paint. He followed the faint echo of dripping water until he reached the studio. The light there was soft, diffused through the skylight. And on the easel, fresh canvas. Paint still wet. A portrait unfinished. It was him. Not the ruthless CEO, not the man the papers shredded, but younger, gentler, his eyes mirrored by another figure standing behind him, hand resting on his shoulder. Amina. She'd painted him not as an enemy, but as a brother. He sank onto the stool, staring. Every wall of certainty collapsed inward. He'd been blind, and she'd seen everything clearly. He'd hunted her, and she'd still left him something beautiful. His mother's last lesson wasn't written in code or buried in files. It was here in brushstrokes. In forgiveness. He picked up the small envelope pinned to the frame. Inside was a letter, written in a familiar, careful hand. Dominic. You were never meant to be my rival. You were meant to be my reflection. Our mother gave us 2 different pieces of her heart, yours for creation, mine for compassion. She believed the world needed both of us, not one above the other. If you want to understand what she truly built, look not at the foundation's accounts, but at the children it saved. They are our inheritance. Amina. Tears blurred the words. He sat there until the light changed, golden rays spilling across the canvas. Everything he believed about power, family, betrayal, had been inverted. She hadn't been the threat. He had. And someone, Thomas, had played them both, using their mother's secret to keep them divided. Dominic rose slowly. There was still one thing left to do. He would find Amina. And he would make it right. Dominic realizes the truth is the exact opposite of what he believed. Amina wasn't his enemy but his mother's chosen heir, meant to balance his ambition. The real manipulator was Thomas. The city that once belonged to him now looked like an unfamiliar machine. Skyscrapers that bore his name glared back in silence. Screens still flashed his downfall. Rerun after rerun, Voss legacy scandal. CEO accused of exploiting sister. Dominic drove through dawn traffic like a ghost, every billboard an accusation. But his mind was no longer clouded. The shock had calcified into something harder clarity. Thomas had orchestrated everything. The leaks, the cameras, the humiliation. He had turned brother against sister while hiding behind loyalty. And Amina, he realized now, had never wanted revenge. She wanted understanding. Her letter proved that. He'd spent his life proving himself untouchable. Now, he had to do something he'd never done before: trust someone else's truth. But first, he had to take back control. At 9 a.m., he walked into Voss Industries headquarters. Security hesitated, uncertain whether to stop him. The news had said he was suspended, but old habits ran deep. When Dominic Voss entered a room, people moved. He took the private elevator to the 47th floor Executive Security Division. Thomas's floor. The glass doors slid open with a soft chime. Thomas was there, sleeves rolled up, sipping coffee as though the world hadn't cracked open. He didn't look surprised. "Dominic," he said evenly. "You shouldn't be here." Dominic shut the door behind him. "You've been busy, planting cameras, fabricating leaks, and lying to me for years." Thomas set his mug down with surgical calm. "You're mistaken." Dominic dropped a printed sheet on the table, the server log, marked with admin read. "Your alias. Your timestamps. You accessed my personal cloud hours before the video leaked." Thomas looked at it, then met his gaze. "You think you're the first Voss to try tracing me? Your mother did the same. She realized what I was capable of, but too late." Dominic froze. "What did you do to her?" Thomas smiled faintly. "She trusted me, like you did. And that trust kept the Foundation alive long enough for her to die believing she'd left it safe." The words hit like ice water. "You killed her?" "No, I only accelerated the inevitable." Dominic lunged forward, fists slamming against the desk. "You son of—" Thomas didn't flinch. "You always had your father's temper. That's why Eleanor couldn't trust you to lead. You were too much like the man who broke her." Dominic's pulse thundered. "And what, she could trust you?" Thomas leaned back. "She trusted systems, not people. She built the Foundation to survive sentiment. But I saw what her compassion would cost: billions funneled to untraceable causes, lives saved on paper while corruption rotted underneath. I cleaned it up, efficiently. You exploited children in her name. I preserved her empire. There's a difference." Dominic stared at him, realization sinking deeper with each word. "That's why you needed me humiliated. If I fell, no one would believe Amina either." "Exactly," Thomas said softly. "Two heirs, both discredited, and I keep control indefinitely. It's what your mother intended: a custodian to keep the vision alive, free from emotional interference. You twisted her legacy into profit." Thomas stood. "You wouldn't understand. You build technology, I build futures." Dominic's eyes darkened. "No, you build graves." He turned for the door. "This isn't over." Thomas's voice followed, low and calm. "You can't prove anything. Every document traces back to you. Every camera I planted was logged under your name. The system believes you did it." Dominic looked back once, hatred burning clean through fear. "Then I'll stop playing by your system." He left without another word. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent, oblivious, but his mind was sharp again. He knew Thomas's weakness: precision. The man documented everything, archived every betrayal behind encryption and timestamps. Somewhere, there would be evidence, proof of manipulation. He called the one person who still answered. Nina Rojas, his former cybersecurity chief, fired 2 years ago for ethical disagreements. She picked up after one ring. "Dominic, didn't expect to hear from the man who called me idealistic liability. I deserve that," he said, "but I need your help." "Why would I help you now?" "Because the same man who fired you is the one who framed me and destroyed my sister's life." A pause. Then, "You have 30 seconds to convince me." He explained everything: the cameras, the falsified logs, the inheritance twist, Thomas's confession. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Then Nina said, "You have a backup server in Geneva, right? Mirror of the Foundation's core archive?" "Yes." "If he's as arrogant as you say, he kept a control ledger there, a black file indexing every covert project. It's off-site, offline, only accessible by biometric keys. Dominic exhaled. Meaning? Meaning if we can access it, we can prove everything, but we'll need both Voss signatures, yours and your sister's. Amina. He gripped the wheel. Then we find her. He started where she'd left her trail, the mansion, the orphanage records, the last staff logs. Every clue pointed south. She'd gone back to Kenya, to the small village where Eleanor had built her first art school. He boarded a flight that night. Nairobi smelled of rain and clay when he landed. He drove 3 hours inland, through red dirt roads and morning fog, until he reached a low hill where children played barefoot among half-finished murals. The sign read, Eleanor's Hands Foundation, Amina Mwende, Director. Dominic stopped the car, heart pounding. She had rebuilt the name that he had nearly destroyed. He stepped out, dust rising beneath his shoes. Amina stood at the center of the courtyard, helping a child tie a paint-streaked apron. She looked different, calmer, lighter, as though she'd shed the city's weight. When she saw him, her eyes widened, but she didn't move. He walked slowly toward her. You were right, he said quietly, about everything. She didn't reply. Her expression was unreadable. I found the letter, he continued, and the portrait. I know what Mother wanted. Do you? She asked softly. Or do you just want to undo what you did? I want to make it right. Her voice trembled. You can't undo humiliation with apologies, Dominic. You made the world think I was a thief. I know. But the real thief is still out there. The man who killed her, who framed us both. A flicker of something crossed her face, fear, or recognition. Thomas. Yes, he's been controlling the foundation for years. We can expose him, but I need you. We need both our signatures to unlock the Geneva ledger. Amina looked down at the children painting nearby. And if I refuse? Then he wins, again. Silence hung between them. Finally, she said, you always speak like winning is the goal. He met her gaze. Not this time it's about truth. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If you're lying to me again, I'll walk away forever. I deserve that, he said. But I'm not lying. That evening, as the sun bled into the savannah, they sat together for the first time as siblings, two fragments of a legacy finally aligned. Amina handed him a small flash drive, Mother's journals. I digitized them after she died. Maybe they'll help you understand what she really feared. Dominic turned it over in his palm. Thank you. She looked out at the horizon. Do you ever think she knew this would happen? He followed her gaze. She knew everything. That's what terrifies me most. Later that night, as he prepared to leave, an elderly man approached from the gate, a former foundation worker, cane tapping softly against the gravel. You're Voss, the man said. Eleanor's boy. Dominic nodded. You knew her. The old man smiled faintly. Everyone here knew her. And we all knew about Thomas Reedwell. Dominic froze. You did? The man's eyes were clouded but sharp. He used to come here after dark, collecting files, said it was for safety. But Eleanor, she stopped trusting him years before she died. She told me if anything ever happened, I should remember one thing. What was it? The man leaned close, voice trembling with memory. She said, if the day ever comes when the children's hands are no longer free to paint, you'll know the devil wears my son's face. Dominic's breath caught. What? The man shook his head. She didn't mean you, boy. She meant the other one, the man who pretended to be her son. Dominic stared at him, pulse thundering. Who? The old man smiled sadly. Thomas Reedwell. He was never her employee. He was her first adopted child. A bystander reveals the ultimate twist. Thomas wasn't just Eleanor's employee, he was her first adopted son, the one she disowned, now exacting vengeance from the shadows. The night after the revelation was the kind that refused to end. Stars burned cold and sharp above the savannah, 1,000 eyes watching from infinity. Dominic didn't sleep. He couldn't. The old man's words looped in his mind like a curse. He was her first adopted son. Thomas Reedwell wasn't an employee. He wasn't an outsider. He was family. Dominic stared at the flash drive Amina had given him. His reflection in the small metal surface looked like a stranger, haunted, sleepless, and suddenly, mortal. When Amina entered the room, her presence steadied him. She was wearing simple clothes, her hair tied back, eyes red but resolute. "You found something," she said quietly. "I found him," he replied. "Or what's left of the story he buried." She sat across from him. "Then, let's finish it." They plugged the flash drive into the laptop. Dozens of folders blinked open. Eleanor, V. Journals 1999-2015. The most recent entry was dated 3 weeks before her death. "Thomas has changed. He speaks of salvation, but dreams of control. I made him my heir once, but compassion without truth breeds monsters. I thought I could save him through structure. I was wrong. Dominic is everything his father was, not cruel, but cold. He hides fear behind precision. I fear he will destroy what he cannot understand. Amina may be the only one who can see beyond bloodlines. If love fails to bind this family, truth must." Amina exhaled softly. "She wrote about all of us." Dominic scrolled down. There was one more line barely readable. "If you find this, remember, the key to everything lies beneath the portrait." He froze. Beneath the portrait? "The one in her mansion?" "Yes," he said. "The one of you." They returned to the old Voss mansion that night. The estate had been closed for months, the press still circling it like vultures. But Dominic had keys, and power, and enough resolve to silence fear. The house felt colder than before, rooms heavy with silence, marble floors reflecting the beam of his flashlight. They entered the art gallery. There it was, Amina's portrait, glowing faintly in moonlight. The brushwork was so real it looked alive, the same eyes, the same quiet strength. Amina stepped forward, trembling slightly. "It's strange, seeing her memory of me. I never even sat for it." Dominic tilted the frame, searching the edges. There. Behind the canvas was a metal plate, small, engraved with an infinity symbol. He pried it loose. Underneath lay a sealed compartment. Inside, a velvet folder. He opened it carefully. Inside were documents, birth certificates, adoption papers, financial ledgers, and a letter sealed in wax. Eleanor's handwriting. "To my children, whichever of you chooses truth over power." He read aloud. "Thomas came to me as a child of war. I gave him my name to save him from a system that would have swallowed him whole. But he never forgave the world for pity. He mistook charity for weakness. When I adopted you, Dominic, he saw his inheritance vanish, and love turned to envy. He told me once that if I ever left the foundation to another, he'd destroy it and anyone tied to it. I believed I could protect both my sons by dividing their paths, one of industry, one of legacy. But now I see I created the same empire twice, one in steel, one in silence. If you are reading this, he has already begun. The proof of his crimes is stored in the Geneva vault, but the key is not blood, it is truth. Both of you must stand together to open it. Only unity can end his reach." Dominic's voice broke slightly at the final line. Amina touched his shoulder. "She wanted us to finish this together." He nodded slowly. "Then we will." By dawn, they were on a plane bound for Geneva. Nina Rojas met them at a secluded hangar, holding a folder of encrypted protocols. "The vault's in the old Voss subsidiary building," she explained. "Off-grid, biometric dual lock, 2 DNA matches must align, no overrides." Dominic and Amina exchanged a look. "What happens once we unlock it?" Amina asked. Nina hesitated. "Then the world sees what Eleanor hid and what Thomas stole." The building sat at the foot of the Swiss Alps, half buried in stone and glass. Inside, temperature-controlled corridors hummed faintly. The vault was a silver monolith at the center of a circular chamber. Dominic approached the scanner. "Ready?" Amina nodded. Their palms pressed against separate plates. 2 beams scanned their irises, their blood signatures. A low tone echoed, "Access granted." The door hissed open. Inside were hundreds of digital drives, old journals, project records, and one terminal pulsing with blue light. Nina connected a decryption key. "Here goes nothing." The monitor flickered to life. Files began unspooling: videos, memos, transaction chains, all labeled "Read Well Initiative." Amina leaned closer. "What is this?" Dominic's eyes darkened. Not charity. Trafficking, funding pipelines. Laundered through the foundation. They scrolled through lines of data, photos, fake aid shipments, child labor records. Every file was signed, Thomas Reedwell, Executive Guardian. Amina's voice shook. He used our mother's legacy to build a shadow empire. Nina's face hardened. And he made you both his scapegoats. Then the screen flickered again. A live message appeared, dated 2 hours ago. If you're reading this, you've already opened my grave. Thomas's voice filled the chamber, calm and venomous. Congratulations, brother. Sister, you found the truth, but truth without control is chaos. I knew you'd come here just as Mother planned. She built this vault as a trap for her enemies. I simply became the last one standing. Dominic's jaw clenched. He's still monitoring the system. You think you've won, Thomas continued. But you've only proven what I always knew, that blood corrupts purpose. You're both sentimental, weak, predictable. That's why the world will never trust you with her legacy. The lights dimmed. A mechanical alarm blared. System lockdown initiated. Nina cursed. He triggered a purge protocol. Everything's being wiped. Amina grabbed the terminal. There has to be a backup. No, Thomas's voice whispered through static. Only ashes remain. But you can still save yourselves. Leave the past buried. Walk away. Dominic slammed his fist into the console. I'm not leaving anything buried. Nina shouted over the rising alarm. I can delay the purge, but I need 5 minutes. Amina's eyes darted to a secondary terminal, an analog failsafe key slot. That's how he overrides the purge remotely. If we sever the uplink, we can stop him. Dominic grabbed a steel bar and jammed it into the circuit conduit. Sparks burst, lighting his face with firelight. The alarm stopped. For a moment, only their breathing filled the vault. The data stream froze, then stabilized. Files restored. They'd beaten him. Or so they thought. Because as silence settled, Nina frowned at the terminal. Dominic, there's something else. She opened the last folder, hidden under a false directory. It wasn't Foundation records. It was DNA data, family archives. Amina stepped closer, scanning the headers. Then she froze. Her name appeared beside Eleanor Voss. Dominic's heartbeat stuttered. What is it? Amina's voice was barely a whisper. She wasn't just my benefactor. He stared at her. What do you mean? She looked up, eyes brimming with something between disbelief and pain. She was my biological mother. Dominic went cold. The world seemed to tilt sideways. But before he could speak, the terminal beeped again. A live feed flickered onto the screen. Thomas Reedwell's face, calm and smiling. So, he said softly, you finally know everything. The irony, isn't it? That the sister you despised was the only true heir, the one Mother never disowned. He leaned closer to the camera. And now that you've found her, Dominic, I no longer need to hide. The screen went black. The truth shatters every foundation. Amina is Eleanor's biological daughter, not Dominic. Thomas manipulated both from the start, and he's still alive, preparing his final move. The world learned the truth at dawn. Not by accident, but by Amina's choice. She and Nina released the vault files to the press. Thousands of pages of financial trails, child labor evidence, and hidden transactions linked to Thomas Reedwell's shadow empire. The story detonated like a second sun. Billionaire family charity, a front for global exploitation, the headlines screamed. Dominic's name appeared in the early reports too, but not as villain this time. For once, the narrative was complicated. The world saw the footage of him inside the vault, fighting the purge, shouting, I'm not leaving anything buried. And then they saw Amina beside him, the maid he'd humiliated, now revealed as the rightful heir of the Voss Foundation. The internet erupted. Some called it justice. Some called it chaos. For the first time in decades, the empire of Eleanor Voss was back in the public eye, but this time stripped bare of myth and privilege. Dominic didn't watch the news. He sat in silence inside the old mansion, listening to the creak of wood and wind. He'd thought that truth would feel clean, like confession, like cleansing. But it didn't. It felt heavy. Like walking barefoot across broken glass. He had built his empire on ruthlessness. Now, stripped of that armor, he barely recognized the man in the mirror. Amina found him in the gallery, still sitting before her portrait. "You did the right thing," she said softly. He gave a hollow laugh. "Did I? Every stock I ever built is collapsing. The board will dissolve my name by morning, and the media, they'll drag me until there's nothing left." She came closer. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe losing what you built is the only way to see what matters." He looked at her, then really looked. The same calm, unflinching steadiness that once irritated him now steadied him. "How can you still talk about redemption after everything I did to you?" "Because," she said, "forgiveness isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about refusing to let it define you forever." He lowered his gaze. "You sound like her." Amina smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why she brought us together." They weren't alone for long. Nina burst through the doors, tablet in hand. "You need to see this." On the screen was a live broadcast, Thomas Reedwell. He was standing on the steps of an abandoned Voss warehouse, flanked by hired guards, cameras flashing around him. "These accusations are lies," he declared, "forged by a bitter woman claiming to be my mother's daughter. The real Eleanor Voss would never have left her legacy to frauds and traitors." He held up a folder. "I possess the only authentic testament of Eleanor Voss. And I will reveal it tonight." Dominic's blood ran cold. "He's going to stage a counterattack." Nina nodded. "He's already mobilizing sympathizers in the board. Half the foundation trustees still think you're both conspiring." Amina clenched her fists. "Then we stop him before he poisons the world again." Dominic stood, his voice firm now. "No more secrets, no more shadows." By evening, they arrived at the warehouse. Police cordons surrounded the site, but Thomas's men had sealed off the interior. The old place smelled of rust and dust, echoing with the hum of generators. At the far end of the hall, Thomas stood behind a podium, cameras trained on him. He was immaculate in a gray suit, calm, almost serene. When Dominic stepped into the light, Thomas smiled. "Ah. The prodigal son." "You're not her son," Dominic said quietly. Thomas tilted his head. "Not by blood, but by devotion. I was the one she trusted first, before your maid discovered her worth." Amina's voice cut through the tension. "You turned her dream into a nightmare. You used children to build your fortune." Thomas's expression didn't waver. "I saved them. You think feeding them is enough? I gave them purpose. Every great cause demands sacrifice." "You call slavery sacrifice?" Dominic snapped. Thomas smirked. "And what do you call what she did to us? Pitting us against each other like chess pieces. You think this was destiny? It was design." His words hit harder than Dominic expected because part of him knew it was true. Eleanor had created this web, this test, this war of heirs. But Thomas had chosen cruelty. Dominic took a slow step forward. "End it, Thomas. Come with us. Face what you did." Thomas laughed softly. "Still pretending to be the hero, you'll never understand. She made me first, and she made me disposable." He reached into his jacket and for a heartbeat, time fractured. Security screamed. Cameras dropped. Amina shouted, "Dominic!" A gunshot cracked through the hall. The sound echoed like thunder. Dominic stumbled back, his shoulder searing in pain. He hit the ground hard. Amina rushed forward, dragging him behind a pillar as guards scrambled. Thomas stood motionless, gun still in hand, eyes shining with something almost like grief. "It was never supposed to end this way," he whispered. Police stormed in seconds later. Nina had already called them. The warehouse flooded with flashing lights and shouts. Thomas didn't run, he didn't resist. He simply turned the gun toward his own chest and said quietly, "Tell her I tried to be what she wanted." Then he pulled the trigger. The chaos dissolved into silence. For a moment, all that existed was the ringing in Amina's ears and Dominic's ragged breathing beside her. Blood stained his sleeve, but he was alive. She pressed her hands against the wound, tears blurring her vision. "Stay with me," she murmured. "Don't you dare fade now." He looked up at her weakly, half a smile breaking through. "Guess. I had that coming." "Shut up," she whispered fiercely. "You don't get to die before you make it right." He chuckled faintly, even as his consciousness wavered. "That's fair." Hours later, the headlines shifted again. Foundation masterminded by Reedwell exposed and dead. Amina Voss named rightful heir. For once, the story didn't feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. Dominic recovered slowly in hospital, refusing interviews. The world called him redeemed, but he knew redemption wasn't a destination, it was a sentence he'd serve for the rest of his life. Amina visited daily, often sitting beside him in silence. Sometimes she read from Eleanor's journals, sometimes she just looked out the window, where the dawn light broke softly across the city skyline. One morning, as nurses changed his bandages, Dominic spoke. "What happens now?" She smiled faintly. "Now? We rebuild. For the first time together." He met her gaze. "You'll lead the foundation." "We will," she corrected. Mother didn't want one heir, she wanted balance. Dominic exhaled. "Balance? I'm still learning what that means." "You will," Amina said, her voice gentle. "You already started." But just as peace began to settle, Nina entered with grim eyes and a tablet clutched tight. "There's something you both need to see," she said. On the screen was a short encrypted message time-stamped 1 hour before Thomas's death. A final failsafe. "If I fall, the system falls with me." The Foundation servers began blinking offline across continents. Billions in aid frozen, hospitals losing funding, programs collapsing. Thomas's revenge had already begun. Dominic's eyes widened. He built a backdoor. Amina whispered, "Then this isn't over. Thomas is dead, but his digital legacy begins to unravel the world their mother built. The final reckoning hasn't ended, and redemption now means saving not just a name, but millions of lives depending on the Foundation system." The first morning after the chaos broke, the city felt suspended, as though it, too, were catching its breath. Dominic sat on the hospital balcony, sunlight spilling across his still aching shoulder. The air smelled of rain and dust, of cement and green leaves from the trees lining the street below. He watched the distant skyline, hazy and golden, and wondered if he would ever feel like the man he had been before Thomas Reedwell's shadow fell across their lives. Amina came out quietly, holding a steaming cup of tea. She didn't speak immediately, she just stood beside him, watching the city. "Finally," she said, "they've managed to isolate the failsafe." Nina worked around the clock. "Most of the programs are restored. Hospitals, schools, orphanages, they're coming back online." Dominic exhaled slowly. Relief washed over him, but it was tempered with exhaustion. He really thought he could control everything, even from the grave. He underestimated what we'd do together. "Find time find and." Amina smiled faintly. "He underestimated you." Dominic shook his head. "Not me. Us. That's the lesson. I had to see what I'd done wrong to understand what was right." Her gaze softened. "You mean, with me?" He nodded. "And with everyone he hurt. With everyone she ever tried to protect. That's what she always wanted us to do, not just fight for ourselves, but for the people who can't fight for themselves." The Foundation began to rebuild, this time under their shared guidance. Amina's leadership brought a new focus: transparency, direct aid, and programs to prevent any shadow manipulation like Thomas's from ever recurring. Dominic worked alongside her, using his strategic mind not for control, but for restoration. There were still challenges. Some programs lagged, some donors refused to return, and the media's curiosity never truly faded. But for the first time, they felt in control, not because of fear or power, but because of truth. Dominic and Amina spent long evenings reviewing Eleanor's journals, discussing how her vision could translate into the modern day. Sometimes, silence was enough. Sometimes, they just walked through the Foundation's buildings, listening to children laughing, knowing those voices had survived Thomas's schemes. One afternoon, Dominic found himself in the mansion's gallery, staring at the portrait Amina had painted herself, surrounded by children holding brushes and books. Her expression was calm, fierce, and tender all at once. He traced the edge of the canvas with his fingers. Memories of his past arrogance and cruelty returned like distant storms. But now, the storm had passed. Amina joined him silently. She tilted her head toward the portrait. "She would have loved this," she said softly. Dominic nodded. "She did. She always believed in us, even when we didn't believe in each other." They stood together for a long time, the silence filled with shared understanding. Words weren't necessary. The bond forged through fire, betrayal, and truth had created a new equilibrium. Weeks later, the Foundation's first post-crisis report was released. Donations had returned steadily. Programs once frozen were thriving again. Photos of children attending school, laughing, painting, and learning flooded the internet. Dominic read one message aloud to Amina. "Your mother would be proud. You both honor her vision more than she ever could have imagined." Amina smiled. "We're just continuing her work." He nodded, feeling an unfamiliar lightness. "I think, for the first time, I understand what she meant by balance." "Balance," she repeated, "not just power and control, but truth and mercy. Love and accountability. That's her real legacy." That evening, Dominic walked alone through the mansion's grounds. The sun was low, bathing the courtyard in golden warmth. He stopped near the fountain, watching water ripple over stone, its rhythm steady and patient. He thought of Thomas, of all the suffering that had been caused by ambition, envy, and secrets. He thought of his mother, who had tried to protect them in ways he had only now understood. And he thought of Amina, who had survived it all, who had shown him the path forward without a word of accusation. He closed his eyes, taking in the scents of the gardens, the distant laughter of children, the calm of a world slowly healing. For the first time, he felt not only redemption but responsibility, the kind that doesn't make you a hero, only human. The wind shifted, carrying with it a whisper of the past, a reminder of what they had endured and what they had rebuilt. Dominic smiled faintly. In the end, power without compassion is hollow, and secrets without truth are chains. It is only in standing together, in seeing clearly, that the legacy we inherit can finally breathe. He opened his eyes to the horizon, golden and unbroken. The new normal was not perfect. It was alive. It was earned. And it was theirs. The storm had passed, but the quiet that remained carried a truth Eleanor had always known, that life, like water over stone, shapes those who endure it and leaves behind only what survives with love.